Welcome to the AfroGlobLeaders Channel, your ultimate destination for captivating and in-depth explorations into the lives, achievements, and legacies of the world's most influential leaders. Have you ever heard of Francis Kwame Nkrumah, Ghanaian political leader and independence advocate? Born on September 21, 1909, in Crowford, Gold Coast, now Ghana, to a goldsmith father and a retail trader mother. Kwame Nkrumah received early education at Catholic missionary schools and later attended the prestigious Achimota College. In 1935, he traveled to the United States to further his studies, earning a bachelor's degree from Lincoln University in 1939 and later master's degrees from Lincoln and the University of Pennsylvania. During his time in the U.S., he was influenced by socialist and nationalist ideologies, describing himself as a non-denominational Christian and a Marxist socialist. Kwame Nkrumah returned to Ghana, then Gold Coast, in 1947 and became the General Secretary of the United Gold Coast Convention, UGCC, a nationalist movement seeking self-governance. In 1949, he broke away from the UGCC and formed the more radical Convention People's Party, CPP, advocating for immediate self-government. Initiated a campaign of positive action involving non-violent protests, strikes, and non-cooperation with British authorities, leading to his imprisonment in 1950. The Convention People's Party, CPP, won a decisive victory in the 1951 general elections, and Nkrumah was released to become the leader of government business and later the Prime Minister of the Gold Coast in 1952. When Ghana gained independence from Britain in 1957, Nkrumah became the first Prime Minister of the new nation. In 1960, Ghana became a republic, and Nkrumah was elected as the president with extensive powers under a new constitution. He pursued a socialist agenda, implementing welfare programs, nationalizing industries, and promoting Pan-Africanism, the movement for African unity and liberation. However, his administration became increasingly authoritarian, with a one-party state established in 1964 and Nkrumah declared a life president. He was overthrown in a military coup in 1966 while attending a meeting in Vietnam and lived in exile until his death in 1972 in Bucharest, Romania. Nkrumah's legacy as a champion of decolonization, Pan-Africanism, and Ghana's first post-independence leader remains significant, despite the authoritarian turn his rule took in later years. Kwame Nkrumah's political views were centered around three main pillars: achieving political independence for Ghana, establishing socialism, and promoting the unification of Africa under the Pan-African movement. Nkrumah was a staunch nationalist who advocated for immediate self-governance and independence from British colonial rule in Ghana, then the Gold Coast. He formed the Convention People's Party, CPP, in 1949, which led a campaign of positive action involving non-violent protests, strikes, and non-cooperation with British authorities, leading to his imprisonment in 1950. Ghana finally achieved independence in 1957, with Nkrumah becoming the first Prime Minister of the new nation. Nkrumah advocated for a socialist ideology, influenced by his studies and exposure to socialist and Marxist ideologies during his time in the United States. As President of Ghana from 1960 to 1966, he implemented socialist policies, including the nationalization of industries, welfare programs, and a one-party state system. He developed the philosophical concept of consciencism, which sought to decolonize the African mind and promote a socialist path to development based on traditional African egalitarian principles. Nkrumah was a leading proponent of Pan-Africanism, the movement for African unity, liberation, and the promotion of African personality and values. He believed that the unification of Africa was essential for its economic and political development, and for countering the influence of neo-colonialism. As president, he devoted significant efforts to the Pan-African movement, hosting conferences and advocating for the formation of a United States of Africa. However, his authoritarian rule, economic mismanagement, and obsession with Pan-Africanism at the expense of domestic issues ultimately led to his downfall in the 1966 military coup. Nkrumah's political views were shaped by his experiences under colonial rule, his exposure to socialist and nationalist ideologies, and his vision for a united, independent, and socialist Africa free from neo-colonial influences. Kwame Nkrumah vehemently opposed colonialism and was a leading figure in the struggle for independence and decolonization in Africa. His stance on colonialism can be summarized as follows. Colonialism was an exploitative system that subjugated Africans economically, politically, and psychologically for the benefit of European imperial powers. Nkrumah believed that imperialism knows no law beyond its own interests, in transforming colonies into sources of cheap labor and captive markets for European goods. He highlighted the detrimental psychological impacts of arbitrary colonial rule, arguing it made people lethargic, with fear becoming the dominant force in their lives. Colonialism alienated Africans from their history, culture, and sense of self through the imposition of European norms and values. Political independence from colonial powers was essential but not sufficient. Nkrumah emphasized the need for economic independence and restructuring to break the chains of neo-colonialism, where former colonial powers continued exploiting Africa's resources and markets through neo-imperial methods like military bases, unfair trade terms, and financial control. He advocated a revolutionary approach of mass nonviolent protests and non-cooperation with colonial authorities, termed positive action, to achieve self-governance. This led to his imprisonment by British authorities in 1950 before Ghana's independence in 1957. Nkrumah saw African unity and continental unification under a United States of Africa as crucial for countering neo-colonialism and charting an independent path of development free from external domination. His vision of Pan-Africanism was a core part of his anti-colonial stance. In essence, Nkrumah's stance was that colonialism was an unjust system of oppression and exploitation that had to be dismantled through a revolutionary struggle for true political and economic self-determination across Africa. His influential ideas and leadership made him an iconic figure in the decolonization movement. Kwame Nkrumah's political views on decolonization, African unity, and socialism set him apart from many other African leaders of his time in several ways. While some African nationalist leaders favored a gradual transition to self-rule, Nkrumah advocated for immediate and uncompromising independence from colonial powers. He led a campaign of positive action, involving civil disobedience and non-cooperation with British authorities, which led to his imprisonment in 1950 but ultimately hastened Ghana's independence in 1957. Nkrumah was one of the foremost proponents of Pan-Africanism, the idea of uniting Africa into a single federated state. He envisioned a United States of Africa as crucial for countering neo-colonialism and charting an independent path for the continent's development. This set him apart from leaders focused primarily on their individual nation's independence. Influenced by his exposure to socialist ideologies, Nkrumah advocated for a socialist path to development in Africa. As president of Ghana, he implemented socialist policies like nationalization of industries and a one-party state system. This contrasted with the capitalist or mixed economic models adopted by many other newly independent African nations. Nkrumah developed the philosophical concept of consciencism, which sought to decolonize the African mind, promote African values and identity, and create an ideological basis for African socialism. This Afrocentric approach differentiated him from leaders who embraced Western ideologies more readily. However, Nkrumah's increasingly authoritarian rule and obsession with Pan-African unity at the expense of domestic issues ultimately led to his downfall in 1966. While his revolutionary zeal inspired many, some contemporary African leaders like Sékou Touré of Guinea shared similar visions of continental unity. In essence, Nkrumah stood out for his uncompromising stance against colonialism, his fervent advocacy of African unity and socialism, and his attempts to develop a uniquely African philosophical and ideological framework, making him one of the most influential but also controversial figures of Africa's decolonization era. However, it's important to note that Nkrumah's increasingly authoritarian rule and obsession with Pan-African unity at the expense of domestic issues ultimately led to his downfall in 1966, setting him apart from some other African leaders in his later years. Kwame Nkrumah never died, he lives forever in our stories. What do you think of this inspiring story of Francis Kwame Nkrumah? Share your thoughts in comments, subscribe for more fascinating stories like this to come with Madibo Keita of Mali.